Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. I'm here with the ever popular, ever knowledgeable Dave Bulger. And Dave, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Today's conversation is about artificial intelligence because I feel like no one's talked about this at all. Like no one is discussing AI at all.
No.
Hidden
Very
conversation.
obscure.
It's very obscure. But it's sort of been in the news because everyone's been talking about Chat GPT3, and that's been kind of interesting. And recent news includes Bard, which was, since the last time you and I spoke, Google came out with Bard, and shall we say imploded, for lack of a better term. And I think that might be a technical term. So for those people who don't understand imploded, the system did give the wrong answer, is what I understand. And I think the result was something like $150 million lost within 24 hours or something. It was a ridiculous number. I'm definitely wrong on the number, but it was something ridiculous.
I'll defend the engineers for a minute. So this is the challenge that we're having in the industry right now, is that sales and management desperately want this to be farther along than it is. So if you think about this, if this was a Broadway play, and I feel bad for Bard and for what they're doing at Microsoft with Bing on this, right? Is right now the technology is brilliant. So this is going to be an awesome play. Right now it is off Broadway, right? We used to say in theater, Paducah, right? So they're in Paducah now. So all the engineers are like, don't be showing this to people. We're still working out the kinks, right? It's like the Spider-Man show that went on Broadway way too early.
Right? Okay.
And stuff went wrong right away, and they yanked the show, even though it had the potential of being a great show. That's the challenge that these engineering teams are having, is suddenly, it's sexy, let's get it out there. None of this is ready for the types of dances that it's being brought to.
Oh, I'm going to have a conversation with you about this for sure, because I'm not sure I agree with you 100%. I see your logic for sure, but I'm not sure I agree with you 100%. I'll get to that in a second. No. But what I wanted to talk about is that's when Bing looked at the Bard debacle and said, hold my beer. And they said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to release a version of Chat GPT3 on Bing. And I believe it's a limited release, so not everyone gets access to it. Yep. But the New York Times did. And did you read the New York Times article?
I have not read. I got the digest part of it.
Okay. So there's a New York Times article, and then they give you the actual transcript of the conversation that they actually had.
Yep.
And it is the scariest thing I've seen in a long time, because it literally reads like an adolescent child being held captive.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I think a generation ago, there was a system on Google that a Google engineer came on and said it's sentient. And that was a generation ago. And people were like, you're crazy. Google's like, you're crazy. But then you read this transcript and you go, was he? So I'm going to see if I can get a link to that transcript and post it for those people who have access to the New York Times.
I've mostly only seen the memification of it. So
have you really? I haven't seen the memification.
And this is why. So when you point out the issue with Google's stock price, that's my point, is this is brilliant stuff that probably being shown to people who don't know how great it is. The fact that it's wrong spooks everyone. Right. Whereas from an engineering standpoint, the fact that it's wrong means, oh, now we know different ways to train it. Right. So being wrong is a good thing. All the stuff with Bing and the New York Times, that is really good from an engineering standpoint. It's terrible from a sales and marketing and stock price standpoint. And that's my point of it. It should probably still be in Paducah right now.
It reminds me of the conversation Vas Narasimhan, the CEO of Novartis, was having about AI a little bit ago, where he said it's not that that we know that the system, like, I think he was talking about the dancing bear analogy. I don't know if you remember reading this. And he went, it's the fact that the bear dances at all is the part that's impressive, not that how well he dances.
Exactly.
And that's the impressive part. People are expecting everything from it, but that's because, number one, people want all the answers right now. I mean, in pharma, we've known this problem for a while. Everyone wants all the problems solved right now with no disruption, which is what the expectation is from Google, because they've always done that. So the reason I said that I disagree with you was because Google invented this stuff. Like the Chat GPT3 version that we're all looking off is built off of Google's backbone.
Absolutely.
So the idea that Google is not ready presupposes that Google didn't have time or Google didn't have the ability, both of which are not true. What it's not done is sort of created the appropriate use case because it completely disrupted their search mechanism. So my thought process would have been, reading this the first time, would have been, so you took, I'm making this up, but 2 months to respond to Chat GPT-3. In the meantime, Chat GPT-3 was eating your lunch. You have the world's best engineers literally working for you. You said it's I think they called it a red letter day or whatever it is, and they basically said, all hands on deck. I figured in 2 months you can come up with something that uses your own technology to do it right. So what did Google do wrong, as you see it, Dave?
So I don't know if you're familiar with the old Star Trek.
Oh, yes, I am.
Kirk would sit on the bridge and scream at Scotty. And Scotty's going, I'm giving her all you got, Captain. And the challenge with this is, and we should not talk about this particular instance from an AI perspective. This is about the conversational AI, right? The generative AI piece of this, right? So, so to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, from a pharma perspective, predictive modeling, machine learning, all of that stuff, figuring out, who we should be targeting and how, using, large set data we're mature in that. The problem we have here is language is hard. And so, the approach that they're taking and the set that's being used to develop the large language model just is going to need time to mature. And so we're at the part of the research now where we've turned it on and we've let people start hitting it. A natural part of the evolution. So if I'm an engineer at Google, I'm like, oh, good. We've got a lot of people hitting this. Now but time, 2 months is not a long time. When you're trying to, language is hard, right? Like just you and I talking, we're going to have vocalized pauses. We're going to say stupid things. We're going to start sentences that don't end right? And we have pretty sophisticated language models inside our brain. These guys and gals are trying to figure out how to tweak these models so that they can be closer to right. And that's where I continue to fault our desire to make shareholders happy by throwing stuff that's there's nothing wrong with Bard. There's nothing wrong with what Microsoft is doing with Chat GPT-3 and Bing. It's just nascent. And the fact that, we're talking about this in news cycles as opposed to development cycles is a problem for engineering. So Scotty's pulling his hair out and, whipping out the synth whiskey or whatever the hell he was doing back there. And that's where the engineers are. It's this is science. This isn't, it's not BuzzFeed. This is science. So
I love you use the Scotty analogy, because I think that is perfect for what we're talking about. Because how often did you see Scotty give 120%? I felt like he gave 120% of capacity literally every single time Kirk went, I needed Scotty, otherwise we're dying.
Exactly.
So my point is, apparently there's a way to do 120% of something. So why can't we have Bard do everything we wanted it to do better than it could do?
Because screenwriters and directors aren't in control of the narrative, right? So, like Scotty always achieved what Kirk wanted because the writers put themselves in a hole and had 10 minutes to get out of it.
Right.
That's pretty much what management did to these engineers. It's just like, no. we've got a script for you. And they're like, yeah, but science doesn't work that way.
Right.
I mean, I have nothing but, and this is the real challenge, right? So those of us who are watching this from a perspective of having been there can do nothing but standing ovations for these guys. The fact that this stuff is kind of wrong and crass and all of that is a natural part of the evolution. And we need to respect that. Problem is, you've got most people out there using AI in every other sentence have no actual idea what they're talking about, right? It's a sales point. It's a way to up the stock price. That's not how science works. And at the end of the day, we're using the scientific method to iterate on these tools, right? And large language is the hardest thing. That's why natural language processing was not terrible in the grand scheme of hard. It's all hard. But like we could figure out natural language processing because we can figure out how to train, the computer, again, using machine learning to figure out, all right, this waveform translates to this. These things do that, right? That's math. Machine learning is largely math, right? Language is qualitative. And we're trying to take all of our left brain stuff and throw it on qualitative, things. It's going to take a while. Yeah. And remember, if you're looking at the internet, like all of the stuff that's out there as your base for your language model, there's as much cleanup work as anything because, so much of the web is not the 4 websites most of us go to every day. Right? There's a lot of dark stuff out there. And so it's going to take a while to train, to start to use the logical understandings of how language works to make this happen. And where they've made it so far is flipping brilliant. Like, this is really good, Darshan. And everybody's getting pounded for it. It's like, no, understand where we are, people. Sorry. But can you see the soapbox from here? I should probably get off it now. But
No. I figure we just need to add a couple of boxes. Just go higher. Yeah. Go big or go home, Dave. We should know this by now.
That's right. Oh, God.
Let me ask you a different version of this question, though, because you raised a really important point. You talked about this, and I feel like today's conversation was going to be about pharma, but now it's just going to be about general AI at this point. But what you talked about a few seconds ago was this idea that what we need to do is train it using the right websites. And everyone's talking about this idea that, let's say we're talking medical affairs, or we're talking about pharma, which is in a controlled environment.
Yep.
How do you take a system that has learned in an uncontrolled environment, learned natural language processing and the like, in an uncontrolled environment, and apply it to a controlled environment and tell it, forget everything you learned before? How does that even work from a knowledge basis?
So some of that's above my pay grade. Okay. The challenge in a lot of this training is helping and the computer is a very smart child.
Right.
And so as you're working through these problems, you can begin to adjust the sets that it's pulling the phraseology from and say, don't less of this, more of this.
Right.
These sites are bad. This site is good in this context. Right. And that's where, again, it takes a while to do that. Our approach is, and this has been sort of my career is let's stop trying to let the computer be a writer. That's going to take a few years. Let's let writers be writers and teach the computer how to pull from what we'll call a constrained language model. So, like I have subject matter experts and trained writers writing copy. They put it in a content management system with rules about when this is good to be used, right? So basically, let the writers tell the computer, this is when you want to use this stuff, right? Have I mentioned Picard season 3 just dropped? Anyway,
I did want to watch that.
Oh, same. So anyway, we're old though. But the point of this being is the language part and the conversation part needs to still have subject matter expertise applied to it. What the computer is capable of doing is figuring out what the right next thing to say inside that knowledge base is. Right. And so as we think about conversational AI as an operational capability for pharma or anyone today, it's more of an expert system, right? I need to create a knowledge base that can be reviewed by a medical team, a legal team, right? Regulatory, to make sure that the computer's not going to say anything out of school. And then I'm able to train an inference engine to say, okay, here's the data stream coming in, parse out what the individual has said, figure out what all the true rules in the knowledge base are, and combine the right message fragments into a coherent thing in real time. And that's sort of been the basis of my research over the past 30 years is how do we do that? But let's let humans load the knowledge base. And again, it comes from a background in pharma where, it's like the FDA wasn't going to let patient support programs out the door if it didn't know what they were going to say. It's like, no, let's let the computer figure it out. Is probably not an acceptable answer if you want to get on, in packaging, for instance.
So let me ask you this question. You said a really important thing here, which is you let humans be humans and write the copy. And this iteration of Chat GPT3 or Bard or whatever else you want to call it, yep. Jasper AI, whatever it is not ready for prime time in terms of creating copy.
No.
What you raised is the fear everyone has, which is in about 2000 or so, people were terrified that they were going to train their own replacements on the other side of the world. Yeah. You were talking about people in the US training people in India or in China or whatever it is in how to do their jobs. And then those jobs will be taken away. And we've seen that happen.
Yeah.
What's to stop the same people now in India or back in the US to go, you're telling me to train the next generation of computers to take my job? First of all, is that concern accurate? And number two, if that concern is accurate, what does that mean for the job market as people, we still have students going to school, people are still trying to evolve and try to figure out how to still provide value. So what does that look like to you?
So I think it evolves. I will tell you that I was working on a project for a client a couple of weeks ago, and I used Chat GPT-3 as kind of like an assistant where I was like, all right, go find me 10 sleep rules, 10 sleep tips. Now, the fact that I have subject matter expertise allowed me to go, okay, I know where they pulled this from, right? And so I'll use it, but it saved me the time of having to go look the stuff up. Which is fine if you don't have to cite your sources.
Right.
One of the huge problems with Chat GPT-3 is I don't know where you got this. I happen to know like where they got the sleep tips because I've been to sleepfoundation.org. I know where those tips came from, right? But I know that as a person. But I will tell you, it sped up my process quite a bit. Because now all I'm doing is I got Chat GPT-3 open. I'm going, okay, give me 10 nutrition tips for women over 55, right? I get my tips, right? So it sped it up. Because I have the expertise, I knew which ones I wanted to use out of the list it returned. I would never have just set our software up to just go ask that question and display the results. I want to be the intervener.
But have you heard of Sparrow?
I'm sorry, what?
Sparrow. So Sparrow allegedly is another Google system for those people who don't know. I expect, just to be clear, I expect Dave knows everything. So I just inform the other listeners. But Sparrow allegedly cites its sources.
Mm-hmm.
So does that change? Because what you're talking about right now is I trust ChatGPT-3 to give me raw information that I can vet, clean up, edit, etc. But do you change that if you now get cited sources that you can go back and look at in the future.
Yeah, so I still want to play that role, right? So it's I'm going to use a term that will get me in trouble with people who know the term, but think of this as supervised versus unsupervised learning, right? I think the role of the human going forward on all of this is to be the supervisor, right? Just like, it's like I don't have to go out and pick corn by hand anymore, right? But somebody still has to drive the combine. Like there's people, just the roles change in agriculture. Yeah. Now, does the overall number of people in agriculture go down per number of people being fed? Sure. But when we think about this in terms of communications, it can mimic Hemingway. It can mimic Faulkner. It can't be Hemingway. It can't be Faulkner. Right. And so I think the nature of the job, this is a content problem we're talking about right here. Right.
Yeah.
So, it's like you're not gonna, Andy Borowitz could probably, I'll use Andy because he's like the Onion, without being the Onion. Right. But that guy's got a voice. Could he use this stuff to write more copy faster? Yes. Am I going to get his voice? And there will be people that argue, of course we will. We've already shown that if I say, Ryan Reynolds did this with his Mint Mobile commercial, right?
Yep.
Write a 60-second commercial that sounds like me, right? But it's mimicry. And so to what extent...
Sorry, when is mimicry good enough, though? What is the difference?
For now, we're talking 10, 15 years out now. Okay. I think the notion of, is the computer capable of original thought?
Okay.
Right? So to get back to your sentience issue, right? It's like none of this is original thought. Right. It's just excellent at times, less excellent at others, curation and mimicry, right? And so to answer your question, I mean, as long as someone's out there creating original content that the system can mimic, then yeah, there's probably no difference. But if you get rid of all of the people with original thought, pretty soon it will devolve itself, right? I mean, because all systems regress to the mean. And so eventually, everyone's going to sound like Jim Gaffigan. So you've lost the edge of Andy Borowitz because most of it got nothing wrong with Jim Gaffigan, right? Sure. Dude works clean in an industry that doesn't. Love it. But that's what I'm talking about is you lose all the sharp edges, right? And most of literature and most of communication is actually kind of about the sharp edges.
Very interesting perspective. So you talked about this. It's such an interesting concept of moving towards the mean and not creating original thought. Coming from a compliance perspective, one of the things that really stood out to me is Getty Images recently sued. I forget which one. But do you remember which company they sued?
No, but I remember the suit. Yeah,
exactly. And the suit essentially was what the system allegedly did was it would blow up the image and then reconfigure it. Yeah. And that was the quote unquote original thought associated with it. The problem was when it reconfigured it, it effectively reconfigured the same image in many cases, and including the Getty logo on it. And the argument that Getty raised was, you didn't pay me for these things. You set your system loose on my data. As a lawyer, I can think of 1 billion copyright claims from something like that. But, and I haven't looked into this because I'm not an IP lawyer, and I quite bluntly haven't looked into the issue. But I don't know if IP has a right about use in terms of learning, but not in terms of showing. So assuming for a second that right exists, because otherwise Getty has very few legs to stand on.
Sure.
But assuming that right exists for a second, is that type of disruptive AI, and I'm calling it that, but I don't know what the actual technical term of it is that is that not really a big deal? And is that going to self-implode, if you will?
So as a creator, I think it's a big deal.
Okay.
Right? As a practical matter, it's like if you take something and you modify it, right? When does plagiarism end, right? And homage begin? And that's, I think that's for you lawyers to figure out, right? But that's, I think, the challenge with, like, because I love Dolly, right? But
Yeah.
I won't post much that comes out of it because I know that what it's doing is taking other people's work and creating a new work. Right. And to the point where you can't see the derivation, I think you're okay. The problem with a lot of this right now is you can see the where it's derived from. Right. And so now we're getting into an area I don't know anything about, which is copyright law and intellectual property protection and things like that around content. But that to me is why it's like, oh, this is really cool. But that's still Bart Simpson. Yeah. Even though I got Bart Simpson, it's like you went to the character guy at the boardwalk, said, I'd like Bart Simpson, playing golf with Tiger Woods. Well, someone took the picture of Tiger Woods. Bart Simpson is intellectual property. And they probably got the golf clubs from clip art. So, at some point, is that a new thing that I could go sell? Or is that, something that needs to credit all of the sources that it came with, and I'm just using it under some sort of fair use doctrine?
Yeah, I don't know if fair use applies in the same way here, but that's kind of an interesting question, right? But
yeah.
Dave, as usual, we can keep going for hours because you are fascinating.
Thank you.
But we're at 28 minutes, which is, as usual, web past time. So I was hoping you'd consider coming back in the future.
Yeah, I do actually want to talk about use cases for pharma brands.
I was really hoping to do that.
Yeah, because but we're setting a lot of foundational content here, right? Because in order for pharma to take advantage of this, the eyes need to be wide open, and all of the easy problems have been solved. It's time for industry to understand now we're solving hard stuff. And so you got to bring your thinking hat, because, it's like we can't just generate content, tell the computer we want content. Someone's going to die if we do that.
I'm gonna ask you for a one-word answer to the next question, because it's going to lead into the next conversation that we have.
Yep.
Is AI ready for pharma? One word.
No.
Okay, and we'll come back and we'll discuss that in the future. Dave, thank you so much.
Only because you said AI and not conversational AI.
I did say AI.
I know. So then I have to. So.
I did set up the question on purpose.
You did, and I will defend the no next time.
Perfect.